Help me! My baby is about to be born!
I spent 9 months alone, pregnant with the man who abandoned me without explanation. Caught between hate and love, he appears at the restaurant where I work, and that same night I say, my baby is being born, and he discovers he's a father at the worst possible moment. But what I didn't know was that everything had been planned, and now I'm going to tell you everything.
Welcome to my library. I'm Lena, and our story is just beginning.
The dinner rush at Carmelo's hit like a tidal wave every Friday night. Tables packed with couples celebrating anniversaries and businessmen closing deals over overpriced wine. And I moved between them with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing this long enough to anticipate needs before customers voiced them, balancing plates and fake smiles in equal measure. My feet ached. My back screamed in protest every time I bent to clear a table, and the weight pressing against my ribcage reminded me with each breath that I had exactly 3 weeks left before everything changed, before I became a mother to a child whose father didn't even know he existed. Didn't deserve to know, I corrected myself sharply, picking up another order from the kitchen window where Vincent was plating risotto with the kind of artistry I dreamed of having someday, when I finally saved enough to enroll in culinary school, when this apron meant I was creating instead of just serving. "Table 12 needs water," Rachel called out, rushing past me with a tray of appetizers, and I grabbed a pitcher automatically, muscle memory guiding me through the chaos, because thinking too much about my swollen ankles or the baby doing gymnastics against my bladder would make me sit down, and I couldn't afford to sit down, not when rent was due and medical bills kept piling up. I was halfway across the dining room when I felt it, that particular shift in atmosphere that meant someone important had just walked in, the kind of presence that made conversations pause and heads turn even when people didn't know why they were turning. And I knew. Before I even looked up, before I saw him standing in the entrance talking to the hostess with that casual arrogance that came from never being told no, I knew exactly who had just walked into my restaurant, into my carefully reconstructed life that didn't include him. Alessio Santoro looked exactly like he had 9 months ago when he'd kissed me goodbye and promised to come back before disappearing like smoke, except sharper somehow, harder around the edges in a way that spoke of violence and sleepless nights, and the weight of running an empire built on blood. He wore charcoal gray, tailored perfectly to his frame in a way that drew the eye and held it, his dark hair swept back from his face, revealing those brutal cheekbones, and the scar cutting through his left eyebrow that I'd traced with my fingers 1,000 times. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the water pitcher, and I turned away quickly before he could see me, before those storm gray eyes that had memorized every inch of my body could sweep the room and land on me standing here 7 months pregnant with his child. "You okay?" Vincent asked when I burst back into the kitchen, my breathing harsh and uneven. "Fine," I lied, setting the pitcher down before I actually dropped it. "I just need a minute." But minutes weren't something I had, because Rachel stuck her head through the door 2 seconds later with panic in her eyes. "Ilara, you need to take table 7. Michael just called in sick and we're drowning out here." Table 7. Of course it was table 7. The universe had a sick sense of humor. "Can't someone else?" I started, but Rachel was already gone, pulled away by another crisis, and I stood there in the kitchen doorway staring out at the dining room where Alessio had just been seated at table 7, with 2 men I recognized as his enforcers, the kind of men who carried guns under their jackets and didn't flinch at violence. I could refuse, could claim I was too tired, or too pregnant, or too completely destroyed by the sight of him to walk over there and pretend we were strangers. But Bills didn't care about my emotional state, and neither did my unborn son who needed things like food and shelter, and a mother who didn't fall apart every time life got hard. So I straightened my apron, plastered on my professional smile, and walked toward table 7 with my heart hammering so hard against my ribs I thought it might actually break through. I made it 3 steps before Alessio looked up. Our eyes met across the crowded restaurant, and the world stopped. Just completely stopped, sound cutting out and people freezing mid-motion like someone had hit pause on reality, and all I could see was him staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, shock maybe, or recognition, or something darker that looked almost like pain. His gaze dropped from my face to my stomach, to the undeniable swell of pregnancy that my uniform did nothing to hide, and I watched his face go completely blank, that careful mask he wore when playing poker, or negotiating deals, or hiding whatever he was actually feeling. But his hands gave him away, fingers gripping the edge of the table hard enough that his knuckles went white. And I knew that look, knew what it meant when Alessio Santoro lost control of his body language, because it meant something had shaken him badly enough to crack the facade. The silence stretched between us like razor wire, sharp and dangerous and ready to cut, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stand there frozen while my entire carefully constructed world tilted sideways. One of his men said something I didn't hear, breaking the spell, and suddenly sound rushed back in overwhelming waves, conversations and laughter, and the clinking of silverware against plates, and I forced my legs to move, carrying me the rest of the way to their table, with a grace I absolutely did not feel. "Good evening," I said, my voice coming out steadier than it had any right to be. "Can I start you gentlemen with drinks?" Alessio didn't respond, just kept staring at me with those bottomless gray eyes that had once looked at me like I was everything, like I was worth more than power or money, or the empire he'd built, before he'd proven that was a lie by choosing exactly those things over me. "Bourbon," one of the enforcers said, shooting Alessio a confused look. "Neat. Same," the other added. I wrote it down even though my hands were shaking, even though I could feel Alessio's stare burning into my skin like a physical brand. "And for you?" I asked, finally forcing myself to meet his eyes directly, to face the man who'd destroyed me, and see if there was anything left of what we'd been. "Whiskey," Alessio said, his voice rough like he'd swallowed gravel. A double. I nodded, professional and distant and completely falling apart inside, and turned to leave before he could see the tears threatening to spill. "Ilara," my name in his voice stopped me cold, the way he said it with that slight rasp that got deeper when he was emotional, and I wanted to run, wanted to disappear, wanted to be anywhere except standing here visibly pregnant with his child while he looked at me like I was a ghost. "Yes?" I managed, not turning around. Silence, heavy and loaded with everything we weren't saying, and then, nothing. Never mind. I walked away without looking back, made it to the kitchen before my knees gave out, leaning against the wall and trying to remember how to breathe, while my heart tried to beat its way out of my chest. He was here. After 9 months of silence, 9 months of trying to forget him and failing every single day, 9 months of carrying his child and hating him and loving him, and wishing he was dead and praying he was safe, he was here, and he'd seen me pregnant. I stayed in the kitchen longer than I should have, hands pressed against the cool stainless steel counter while I fought to regain some semblance of composure. And when Rachel poked her head in asking if I was okay, I lied and said I just needed water. "Table 7 is asking for you specifically," she said with a curious look. "The guy in gray. He said he wants to order, but only from you." Of course he did. Because Alessio Santoro couldn't just let me avoid him like a normal person. He had to make things difficult, had to force me to come back and face him again even though the first time had nearly broken me. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked back out into the dining room with my order pad clutched like a shield. Alessio's table had gone quiet when I approached, his 2 men looking between us with poorly concealed interest, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "Ready to order?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral and professional even though my insides were churning. "The ribeye," Alessio said, not even glancing at the menu. "Rare, and whatever your chef recommends for sides." His men ordered quickly, and I wrote everything down with hands that only shook slightly, hyper-aware of how close he was, how I could smell his cologne, that same cedar and smoke scent that used to cling to my skin after nights spent in his arms. "Anything else?" I asked, preparing to escape. "Yes," Alessio said, and his voice dropped lower, meant only for me. "When do you get off work?" "That's not appropriate," I replied quietly. "Neither is a lot of things," he countered, "but I'm asking anyway." 11:30, I said, because refusing would only make him more persistent, and I knew him well enough to know that much hadn't changed. "I'll be waiting," he said, and it wasn't a question or a request, just a statement of fact. I didn't respond, just turned and walked away with my spine straight and my composure hanging by a thread, and I felt his eyes on me the entire way back to the kitchen. The rest of the shift was torture. Every trip past table 7 an exercise in not looking, not acknowledging, not letting him see how much his presence affected me, and by the time they finally left 2 hours later, I was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical labor. Rachel was the one who found the money on the table, letting out a low whistle as she counted. $1,500, she said, holding up the stack of bills. "And a note for you." She handed me the folded paper with barely concealed curiosity, and I took it with trembling fingers, recognizing his handwriting before I even opened it. "I'll be outside when you finish. We need to talk." A short, direct, and completely non-negotiable, in a way that was pure Alessio. I could have thrown the note away, could have walked out the back door and disappeared into the night, but I was tired of running, tired of pretending this wasn't happening, tired of carrying this weight alone. So when my shift finally ended, and I changed out of my uniform into the loose dress I'd worn to work, I walked out the front door of Carmelo's into the cool night air knowing exactly who I'd find waiting. Alessio was leaning against a black Mercedes under the streetlight, hands in his pockets, and eyes locked on the door, and when he saw me his entire body went still, that predator's stillness that meant every bit of his attention was focused on one thing, me. He straightened as I approached, and I watched him take in the full reality of my pregnancy, now that I wasn't half hidden behind tables and aprons, watched something that looked like devastation cross his face before he locked it down behind that familiar mask. "Ilara," he said, my name rough in his throat. Alessio, I replied, stopping a safe distance away. We stood there in the amber glow of the streetlight, two people who'd once known every inch of each other, now strangers wearing familiar faces, and the silence between us felt heavy enough to drown in. You came, he said finally, like he'd half expected me not to. You knew I would, I replied, because we both knew I'd never been able to say no to him, not when it mattered. His jaw tightened, and I saw him struggling with something, words he couldn't find or didn't know how to say, and I waited, because making this easy for him wasn't something I had the energy for anymore. You're pregnant, he said, stating the obvious because apparently facing me had destroyed his ability to say anything meaningful. Clearly, I shot back, one hand moving protectively to my stomach. How far along? 37 weeks. I watched him do the math, saw the exact moment the timeline clicked into place, and his eyes went dark with something I couldn't quite name. 9 months, he said quietly. You're 9 months pregnant. Yes. Another silence, this one sharper, more dangerous, and I could see him wrestling with the question he wanted to ask, but was afraid of the answer to. Mana, who's the father? He finally said, and his voice was carefully controlled in a way that told me he was anything but. The question hung in the air between us, and I realized this was it, the moment where everything either changed or stayed broken forever. But before I could answer, before I could decide whether to tell the truth or protect us both with a lie, I felt it. A strange sensation low in my belly, not quite pain, but something urgent and wrong, and when I looked down I saw wetness spreading across my dress, a puddle forming at my feet. Oh God, I whispered, terror flooding through me. Alara. Alessio moved closer, alarm replacing everything else in his expression. What's wrong? I looked up at him with my heart pounding and my hands shaking, and all I could think was that this was too early. I still had 3 weeks. I wasn't ready, but my body didn't care about my timeline or my fears or my carefully laid plans. My baby, I managed, my voice breaking on the words as the first real contraction hit. Sharp and intense and utterly terrifying. My baby is coming now. Chapter 2. The Confession. The words seemed to freeze Alessio in place for half a second before his entire demeanor shifted, the confusion and tension in his expression replaced by something primal and focused, his hands reaching for me before I could fall. Your water broke, he said, and his voice had changed completely, calm and commanding in a way that cut through my panic. How far apart are the contractions? I don't know, I gasped, gripping his arms as another wave of pain started building. This is the first real one. I had some cramping earlier, but I thought the contraction cut off my words, doubling me over with intensity that made me cry out, and I felt Alessio's arms go around me, supporting my weight as my legs threatened to give out. Okay, we're going to the hospital right now, he said, already moving, already lifting me despite my pregnancy weight like I was nothing. Which one is closest? St. Catherine's, I managed between harsh breaths. But Alessio, I can't afford— I don't give a damn what it costs, he interrupted, carrying me toward his car with long strides. You're getting the best care available. He settled me into the passenger seat with surprising gentleness, his hands shaking slightly as he buckled my seatbelt, and when another contraction hit, I grabbed his hand without thinking, squeezing hard enough that my knuckles went white. Breathe, he commanded, his other hand cupping my face and forcing me to meet his eyes. In through your nose, out through your mouth. You can do this. It hurts, I whimpered, hating how vulnerable I sounded but unable to care through the pain. I know, Tesoro, he said, the old endearment falling naturally from his lips, and I saw something fierce and protective flash in his eyes. But you're strong, and we're going to get you help. He closed my door and was behind the wheel seconds later, the engine roaring to life as he pulled out his phone with one hand. Clear the route to St. Catherine's, he barked into the phone. Now, I don't care what you have to do. Traffic lights, roadblocks, everything out of my way in the next 10 minutes, or people start losing jobs. He hung up and immediately dialed again. Dr. Hayes, it's Santoro. I need you at St. Catherine's Labor and Delivery in 15 minutes. I don't care what you're doing. You work for me, and I'm calling in every favor. The mother of my child is in labor. Yes, my child. Just be there. The possessive certainty in his voice when he said my child should have made me angry. Should have made me correct him. But another contraction was building, and all I could do was hold on to the door handle and try to breathe through it. Wait, I managed when the pain subsided enough for me to speak. How did you don't even know, don't I? Alessio interrupted, his eyes flicking from the road to my face and back. You're 37 weeks pregnant. I left 9 months ago. The math isn't complicated, Alara. That doesn't mean— Look at me, he commanded, and something in his voice made me obey. Look me in the eyes and tell me this baby isn't mine. I opened my mouth to do exactly that, to lie and protect my son from the dangerous world Alessio inhabited, but the words wouldn't come because I'd never been able to lie to him, not when he was looking at me like that, like he could see straight through to my soul. I can't, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Because he is mine, Alessio said, and it wasn't a question. Isn't he? Another contraction hit before I could answer, this one stronger than the last, and I screamed through gritted teeth as pain radiated through my entire body. 3 minutes apart, Alessio said grimly, accelerating even faster as traffic parted in front of us. And we need to move. The city blurred past the windows, streetlights and buildings bleeding together as Alessio drove like a man possessed, and through the pain and fear, I found myself watching him, really watching him for the first time since he'd walked into the restaurant. His jaw was locked tight, knuckles white on the steering wheel, and there was something in his expression I'd never seen before, something raw and terrified that didn't match the controlled mob boss persona he wore like armor. 3 weeks early, he muttered, seemingly to himself. Is that dangerous? What did your doctor say about early labor? She said he was measuring big, I managed. That he might come early, but I thought I had more time. He's going to be fine, Alessio said with absolute conviction. You're both going to be fine. You don't know that, I said, fear clawing at my throat. Yes, I do, he replied fiercely, because I won't accept any other outcome. Another contraction ripped through me, and I couldn't contain the scream this time. Couldn't be brave or strong or anything except terrified, as my body prepared to bring my son into the world weeks before I was ready. I felt Alessio's hand find mine, his fingers lacing through mine and squeezing, and when I looked over at him, his face was pale beneath the streetlights, his expression more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. And I'm sorry, he said quietly, and I barely heard him over my own harsh breathing. For everything, for leaving, for not being there, for not knowing about him until now. I'm sorry, Alara. The apology should have felt good, but it just made everything hurt worse because it was 9 months too late. 9 months of struggling alone and being terrified and missing him so badly I could barely function. And sorry didn't fix any of that. Save it, I gasped as another contraction built. Just get me to the hospital. St. Catherine's appeared through the windshield, bright and modern and promising help, and Alessio screeched to a halt at the emergency entrance where a team was already waiting with a wheelchair. Alara Vasquez, 37 weeks pregnant. Water broke approximately 12 minutes ago. Contractions every 3 minutes. Alessio rattled off to the doctor as they transferred me from the car, his hand never leaving mine. Sir, are you the father? A nurse asked. Clipboard ready. Alessio's entire body went rigid, and I felt his hand tighten on mine almost painfully. Yes, he said, the word coming out fierce and absolute. I'm the father. The nurse nodded and started wheeling me toward the entrance, but I tightened my grip on Alessio's hand, panic flooding through me because I couldn't do this alone, couldn't face the pain and fear without someone. And even though he'd destroyed me, he was here now and I needed him. Don't leave, I begged, all pride abandoned. Please, Alessio, don't leave me. His face softened in a way I'd never seen, and he leaned down to press a kiss to my forehead, gentle and reverent and full of promise. Never again, Tesoro, he said against my skin. I swear on my life, I'm not leaving you again. And as they wheeled me through the automatic doors into the bright, sterile hallway, Alessio walking beside me still holding my hand like a lifeline, I let myself believe him, just for tonight, just for this moment. I let myself pretend that maybe the man who'd broken my heart could be the one to help me survive what was coming. Chapter 3. What we were. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fear, bright fluorescent lights washing everything in harsh white that made me squint even through the pain, and I gripped the rails of the bed as another contraction built and crested, and left me gasping for air that wouldn't come. You're doing great, the nurse said, checking monitors that beeped and displayed numbers I didn't understand. Dr. Hayes is on his way. Should be here in 5 minutes. Alessio stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and dangerous as he spoke to someone about security protocols and cleared floors. And I would have laughed at the absurdity of it if I had the breath, because of course he was treating my labor like a military operation. Sir, I'm going to need you to step out while we get her changed and prepped, another nurse said, appearing with a hospital gown. No, Alessio and I said simultaneously, and when our eyes met across the room, I saw my own panic reflected back at me. The nurse looked between us with poorly concealed curiosity. Hospital policy. I don't care about policy, Alessio interrupted, pocketing his phone and moving to my bedside. She asked me to stay, so I'm staying. Alessio, I started, but another contraction hit, and the words dissolved into a cry that I couldn't contain. His hand found mine immediately, and I squeezed hard enough to hurt, hard enough that I felt his bones shift under the pressure. But he didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just stood there letting me use his strength because I'd run out of my own. And breathe with me, he said quietly, his other hand brushing hair back from my sweaty forehead. In, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. I followed his rhythm because I didn't know what else to do, because the pain was too much. and I was terrified, and having Alessio there made me feel slightly less alone, even though he was the reason I'd been alone for 9 months. The nurse sighed but didn't argue further, just worked around Alessio's presence with professional efficiency, and when I was finally in the hospital gown and hooked up to machines that monitored every aspect of my body's betrayal, she left us alone with a promise that the doctor would arrive soon. Silence filled the room, except for the steady beep of monitors and my harsh breathing, and I closed my eyes against the fluorescent glare, exhaustion pulling at me despite the adrenaline. "Alara," Alessio said softly, and I felt him sit in the chair beside the bed. "I need to know, were you ever going to tell me?" The question hurt more than the contractions because it was fair, it was valid, and I didn't have a good answer. "I tried," I said, opening my eyes to look at him. "2 weeks after you left, I went to your house." His expression shifted, something like pain flickering across his features. "I wasn't there." "No," I agreed. "You were gone, completely gone, and no one would tell me where." "Who did you ask?" "Your doorman, your assistant. I even went to that club you own downtown, and they all said the same thing. Mr. Santoro is unavailable, and we don't know when he'll return." Alessio's jaw tightened. "I left the city, needed to handle some business in Chicago. For 9 months, I challenged, anger giving me energy despite the exhaustion. "No," he admitted. "I came back after 6 weeks, but by then," he stopped, seemed to struggle with something. "By then what?" "By then, I'd convinced myself you were better off without me," he said quietly, "and that staying away was protecting you." I laughed, harsh and bitter. "Protecting me? I was pregnant and alone and terrified. But sure, you were protecting me." Another contraction cut off whatever he might have said, and I curled into myself as pain radiated through my entire body, worse than before, sharper and more insistent. When it finally passed, leaving me shaking and nauseous, I found Alessio staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Tell me about him," he said. "Our son. What do you know?" The question surprised me enough that I answered honestly. "He's stubborn, kicks constantly, especially at night, hates when I eat spicy food. The doctor says he's big, probably over 8 pounds already." "Like me," Alessio said, something almost like wonder in his voice. "I was 9 pounds when I was born. Your mother must have hated you," I muttered, and he actually smiled, brief and genuine. "She did. Frequently," he agreed. "What else?" "His heartbeat sounds like thunder," I said, my hand moving to my stomach. "Strong and fast and utterly terrifying because every time I hear it, I remember that I'm responsible for keeping him alive." "You're not alone in that anymore," Alessio said, and his hand covered mine on my stomach. "I'm here now." "For how long?" I asked, meeting his eyes. "Until something more important comes up. Until your empire needs you more than we do." The words hit their target. I saw it in the way he flinched, but before he could respond, a memory surfaced unbidden, pulling me back to a night 2 years ago when everything had been different. The charity gala had been suffocating, all fake smiles and expensive dresses, and people pretending to care about causes they'd never heard of before the invitation arrived, and I'd escaped to the balcony desperate for air and silence. "That's where he found me." "Hiding?" a voice asked from the doorway, deep and amused, and when I turned I saw him for the first time, Alessio Santoro, though I didn't know his name yet, didn't know he was dangerous or powerful or completely off limits to someone like me. I just saw a man who looked as tired of the performance as I felt. "Breathing," I corrected. "There's a difference," he smiled, and it transformed his entire face from severe to something almost approachable. "Mind if I join you in breathing? The air inside is mostly champagne fumes and desperation." "Please," I said, gesturing to the space beside me. We stood there in comfortable silence, the city spread out below us in lights and noise, and I felt more at peace than I had in months. "I'm Alessio," he said finally. "Alara. Beautiful name," he said. "Means star, doesn't it? You speak Greek. My mother insisted I learn," he replied. "Said a man who only speaks one language is only half-educated. Smart woman. Terrifying woman," he corrected, and I laughed. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing, and when he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation, because something in his eyes made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced. 3 days later, he took me to dinner. A week after that, he kissed me in the rain outside my apartment. 2 months later, I was completely, irrevocably in love with him, and 6 months after that, he was gone. "You remember the balcony," Alessio said, pulling me back to the present, and I realized I'd spoken some of the memory aloud. "I remember everything," I said, hating how my voice cracked. "That's the problem." "Alara, you said I was your entire world," I interrupted, years of hurt spilling out. You said you'd never felt this way about anyone, that I was the only real thing in your life, and then you just left." "I had no choice," he said, and there was something desperate in his voice now. "There's always a choice." I shot back. "You chose the Santoro Empire over me. I chose to keep you alive," Alessio said, standing abruptly and pacing to the window. There were people, Ilara, people who wanted me vulnerable, who wanted to use you against me. What people? He was quiet for a long moment, hands braced against the window frame, and when he spoke his voice was carefully controlled. Vanessa Cortez. She worked for my organization, wanted more than I was willing to give. And there was someone else, a man named Julian Voss, who wanted my position badly enough to manufacture opportunities to take it. The names meant nothing to me, but the tension in his shoulders told me everything about how dangerous they were. They orchestrated it, Alessio continued. Made it look like you were a liability, that being with you made me weak. Vanessa started rumors. Julian used them to challenge my authority. And then he stopped, his reflection in the window looking haunted. Then what? I pressed. Then they sent someone after you, he said quietly. A warning. You never knew because I stopped it, but it was clear that staying with me put a target on your back. The revelation should have shocked me, but another contraction was building, and all I could do was grip the bed rails and try to breathe through it. When it passed, Dr. Hayes finally arrived, a distinguished man in his 50s who moved with the confidence of someone who'd delivered thousands of babies. Let's see how we're progressing, he said, snapping on gloves, and the examination that followed was uncomfortable and invasive and made me want to cry from more than just physical pain. You're at 7 centimeters, he announced, moving quickly. Probably another hour, maybe less, an hour. In an hour, I'd be a mother. In an hour, everything would change. I need to tell you something, I said to Alessio when the doctor left, urgency making the words tumble out. About the night you left. He moved back to my bedside immediately. What about it? I found your note, I said, the one that said you couldn't give me what I deserved, that your world was too dangerous. And I understood. I did. But what destroyed me was that you didn't think I was strong enough to make that choice myself. You are strong, Alessio said fiercely. You're the strongest person I know. That was never the issue. Then what was? I couldn't risk you, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. I couldn't watch you get hurt because of me. Couldn't live knowing that loving me might get you killed. So I made the choice for both of us because I was too much of a coward to let you make it. Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and I screamed through it while Alessio held my hand and whispered apologies I couldn't quite hear through the pain. He's coming soon, the nurse said, checking monitors. Your body is doing exactly what it should, but I wasn't ready, wasn't prepared for this, for becoming a mother, or for facing Alessio, or for any of it, and the panic that flooded through me had nothing to do with physical pain, and everything to do with the terrifying unknown ahead. I'm scared, I admitted when I could speak again, looking at Alessio through tears. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I, he said, brushing hair back from my face with devastating gentleness, but we'll figure it out together. You don't get to just waltz back into my life, I said, even as I held onto his hand like a lifeline. You don't get to play hero after 9 months of nothing. I know, Alessio said, and I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance or anything except the opportunity to be here for this, for him, for you if you'll let me. I don't know if I can trust you, I whispered. Then don't, he replied. Not yet. Just let me prove I'm different, that I can be what you both need. Before I could respond, before I could process what he was offering, another contraction hit, and this one was different, more intense, accompanied by pressure that made me cry out. I need to push, I gasped. Oh God, I need to push. The nurse hit a button that brought the room to life, medical staff appearing from nowhere, and suddenly everything was motion and urgency and voices telling me what to do. And through it all, Alessio never let go of my hand, never looked away, never left, just like he'd promised.
Flashback to how they met, revelations about conspiracies, him admitting he was protecting her by leaving, and now she needs to push. We're getting layers of drama here, and I'm living for it. And you?
Chapter 4. The Storm. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, a tearing sensation that made every nerve ending scream, and I bore down with everything I had while voices around me counted and encouraged, and told me I was doing great even though I felt like I was dying. One more push, Ilara, Dr. Hayes said from between my legs, where he had the best and worst view in the room. I can see his head. One more big push. I can't, I gasped, exhausted beyond measure. I can't do it. Yes, you can, Alessio said fiercely, his face close to mine, his hand gripping mine so tight I felt bones shift. You're the woman who rebuilt her entire life alone, who worked on her feet while 7 months pregnant, who survived losing me. You can do anything. I looked at him through the sweat and tears, saw absolute conviction in his storm gray eyes, and found strength I didn't know I had left. The next contraction built like a wave, and I pushed with everything, screaming through the effort until suddenly, miraculously, the pressure released and the room filled with a sound that stopped my heart. Crying, not my crying, but high-pitched and angry and absolutely perfect. It's a boy, Dr. Hayes announced, holding up a tiny, squirming thing covered in vernix and blood, and I started sobbing because he was real. He was here. He was alive. They placed him on my chest seconds later, still attached by the cord, and I looked down at my son for the first time, seeing Alessio's nose and my eyes and a face that was somehow both familiar and brand new. Oh my God, I whispered, touching his tiny hand that immediately gripped my finger with surprising strength. Hi, baby. Hi. Alessio stood frozen beside me, staring at our son with an expression of absolute wonder, and when I looked up at him, I saw tears streaming down his face unchecked. You want to cut the cord? Dr. Hayes offered, holding out scissors. Alessio nodded mutely and moved to cut where directed, his hands shaking badly enough that the nurse had to help guide him, and when it was done, he just stood there looking lost. You can touch him, I said softly. He won't break. Alessio's hand moved tentatively to the baby's head, fingers barely brushing the dark hair, and our son turned toward the touch with that instinctive seeking movement newborns have. He's perfect, Alessio said, his voice wrecked. Ialara, he's perfect. 8 pounds. 6 ounces, a nurse announced after weighing him. 21 inches long, absolutely healthy. They took him briefly to clean and check him, while Dr. Hayes finished with me, and in those minutes of separation I felt panic claw at my chest until they brought him back wrapped in a blue blanket, his tiny face the only thing visible. Have we decided on a name? The nurse asked, pen ready over the birth certificate. I looked at Alessio, realized we'd never discussed this, never had the chance to plan any of it together. I was thinking Matteo, I said carefully, if that's okay. Something shifted in Alessio's expression, emotion too complex to name. That was my grandfather's name. He raised me after my father died. I know, I said quietly. You told me about him. That night on the balcony, you said he was the only good man in your family. You remembered, Alessio said, looking at me with such intensity I felt it like a physical touch. I told you, I replied, adjusting Matteo in my arms. I remember everything. The moment hung between us, weighted with all our history, and I saw him open his mouth to say something when his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. More answer it, I said, exhaustion making my voice flat. I know you need to. Alessio pulled out the phone with visible reluctance, his expression darkening as he read whatever message had come through. I need to make a call, he said, and something in his tone made my stomach drop. I'll be right outside. He left before I could argue, and I watched through the window as he paced the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, his entire body language shifting into something harder and more dangerous. Everything okay? The nurse asked, checking my vitals. I don't know, I admitted, looking down at Matteo, who'd fallen asleep against my chest, tiny and perfect and completely oblivious to whatever storm was brewing. Alessio returned 5 minutes later, his face carefully blank in a way that told me something was very wrong. What happened? I asked. Nothing you need to worry about right now, he said, but his eyes kept flicking to the door like he expected something to come through it. Alessio, it's handled, he said, moving to my bedside but staying tense. I have people dealing with it. Before I could push further, the door opened and a woman walked in, tall and stunning, in a way that made my postpartum body feel like a trash bag, her black hair perfectly styled and her designer suit screaming money. Vanessa Cortez, I realized with sinking certainty, even though we'd never met. Alessio, she said, her voice smooth and poisonous. I heard congratulations are in order. Get out, Alessio said, his voice dropping to something lethal. You have no business being here. On the contrary, Vanessa replied, her eyes sliding to me and Matteo with poorly concealed hostility. I have every business knowing when my organization's leader makes decisions that affect us all. Your organization, Alessio repeated dangerously. Since when do you own anything I built? Since you started making choices with your dick instead of your brain, she shot back. A secret baby, Alessio. Really? What else are you hiding? I felt fury rise in my chest, protective and fierce. You need to leave. Now. Vanessa's laugh was sharp as glass. And who are you to tell me anything? The waitress who got knocked up and trapped the most powerful man in the city. I'm the woman who's going to call security if you're not gone in 10 seconds, I replied evenly, reaching for the call button. Ilara's right, Alessio said, moving between Vanessa and my bed. You leave now, or I have you removed. Your choice. Something flickered in Vanessa's expression, calculation mixed with rage, and I saw her measuring whether to push or retreat. This isn't over, she said finally, directing the words at both of us. Julian sends his regards, by the way. He's very interested in meeting the heir. The threat was clear, and I watched Alessio's entire body go rigid with barely contained violence. If Julian or anyone else comes near my son, Alessio said, each word precise and deadly, I will personally destroy everything they've ever loved before I kill them slowly. Make sure that message gets delivered exactly as I said it. Vanessa's smile was cold. Of course, I'll be sure to pass along your sentiments. She left with a final poisonous look at me, and the moment the door closed, Alessio was on his phone again, voice low and urgent. Double security on this floor. No one gets in without my explicit approval. I want cameras on every entrance and someone stationed outside this room at all times. I don't care what it costs. Just do it. He hung up and turned to find me staring at him with a mixture of fear and fury. You want to explain what that was? I asked, holding Matteo closer. That was Vanessa being exactly as dangerous as I warned you about, Alessio said, running a hand through his hair. She works with Julian, has been trying to undermine me for months. And now she knows about Matteo, I said, the implications making my chest tight. Now our son is leverage. No, Alessio said fiercely. No one touches him. I won't let anyone near him. You can't control everything, I said, hating how my voice shook. You couldn't even keep your ex-whatever from walking into my hospital room. That won't happen again, he promised. I'm putting guards on this door, on your apartment when you're released, on anywhere you and Matteo go. So we're prisoners now? I challenged. And that's your solution. My solution is keeping you both alive, Alessio shot back, which means taking precautions whether you like them or not. We stared at each other, the space between us crackling with tension and fear, and the awful realization that Matteo had just made everything infinitely more complicated. I can't do this, I said quietly, looking down at my sleeping son. I can't raise him in a world where people like Vanessa exist, where he's a target just because of who his father is. Then what do you want? Alessio asked, and there was desperation under the words. You want me to disappear again? Pretend he's not mine? I want him safe, I said, tears streaming down my face. I want him to have a normal life. There's no such thing as normal for people like us, Alessio said, moving closer. But there is safe, and there is protected, and there is a father who will burn the world down to keep him that way. Pretty words, I said, but they lacked heat, because I was exhausted and scared and holding a newborn who deserved better than all of this. Not words, Alessio corrected, his hand covering mine on Matteo's back. I swear to you, Ilara, nothing will touch either of you. I don't care what I have to do or who I have to eliminate. You're both under my protection now. And if your protection is what's putting us in danger? I asked, meeting his eyes. What then? The question hung between us, unanswerable, and I saw him struggle with it before his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, and his expression went dark. What now? I asked wearily. Julian just sent flowers, Alessio said, his voice flat with rage, to this room, with a card congratulating me on my lovely family. The threat was clear, the message unmistakable, and I felt ice flood my veins because our son was less than an hour old, and already people were circling. I need you to trust me, Alessio said, and there was something raw in his voice. I know I haven't earned it. I know I destroyed what we had, but I need you to trust that I will keep you safe. I looked at him, really looked, saw the fear under the anger and the desperation under the control, and I realized he was just as terrified as I was. I'm going to try, I said finally, for Matteo. But if this goes wrong, if your world puts him in danger, then you take him and run, Alessio finished, and I'll make sure no one follows. The promise should have comforted me, but it just made everything hurt worse because it meant he was already planning for the possibility of losing us. A knock on the door made us both tense, but it was just a nurse with paperwork, and I filled out forms while Alessio stood guard by the window, his phone constantly buzzing with updates I couldn't hear. By the time visiting hours ended and they dimmed the lights, I was beyond exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open, and Matteo was asleep in the bassinet beside my bed. You should go, I told Alessio. Get some rest. I'm staying, he said, settling into the chair beside me with the clear intention of not moving. Alessio, I'm staying, he repeated firmly. I've already cleared it with the hospital. I'm not leaving you vulnerable. I was too tired to argue, so I just closed my eyes and let exhaustion pull me under, dimly aware of Alessio's presence as a constant, watchful shadow. I woke hours later to voices outside my room, angry and urgent, and when I opened my eyes I saw Alessio standing at the door talking to two men in suits, his entire body radiating lethal intent. What's happening? I asked, my voice rough with sleep. Alessio turned, and his expression made my blood run cold. Julian made a move, he said quietly, against one of my warehouses. It's a message. What kind of message? The kind that says he knows having a family makes me vulnerable, Alessio replied, and I heard the fury beneath his careful control. The kind that says he's coming. I looked at Matteo sleeping peacefully in his bassinet, so small and innocent and unaware of the danger circling us, and I made a decision. Then we make sure he fails, I said, meeting Alessio's eyes. Whatever it takes. Something shifted in his expression, surprise and relief, and something that looked almost like hope. Whatever it takes, he agreed, and outside our room, in the hallway and beyond, I knew the storm was gathering.
Baby's born, they have 1 hour of peace, and then Vanessa shows up being awful. Julian sends threats via flowers, and Alara goes from, I can't do this, to let's destroy them. That's character growth through rage, and I love IT. Take this opportunity to tell me in the comments what your rating of the story is so far, and if the ending will surprise you.
Chapter 5. Fortress. They released us from the hospital 2 days later, though released was perhaps the wrong word for what amounted to a military extraction orchestrated by Alessio with frightening efficiency. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the service entrance at dawn, men in suits forming a perimeter that made the nurses nervous and the other patients stare, and I walked out carrying Matteo in his car seat feeling like the president being evacuated from a war zone. And this is excessive, I muttered, as Alessio ushered me into the middle vehicle, his hand protective on my lower back. This is necessary, he corrected, sliding in beside me and immediately checking the tinted windows like he expected sniper fire. Julian has people watching the hospital. I'm not giving them opportunities, I wanted to argue, but Matteo chose that moment to whimper, and all my attention shifted to making sure he was secure in the infant seat that had appeared in the car, along with approximately $2,000 worth of baby supplies I definitely hadn't purchased. Where are we going? I asked, as the convoy pulled away from the hospital, surrounded by enough security to protect a small nation. My penthouse downtown, Alessio said. A 24th floor, secure building, armed guards in the lobby and on our floor. It's the safest place right now. Our floor? I repeated, catching the possessive pronoun. Unless you'd prefer I install a small army in your 1-bedroom apartment, he replied, arching an eyebrow. Because that's the alternative. He had a point, much as I hated admitting it. My apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up, in a building where the locks barely worked, and the super disappeared for weeks at a time. Not exactly Fort Knox. Fine, I said, adjusting Matteo's blanket even though he was perfectly comfortable. But this is temporary. Until things settle down. Of course, Alessio agreed, but something in his tone told me we had very different definitions of temporary. The penthouse was exactly what I expected from Alessio Santoro. All floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture, and the kind of sterile elegance that came from having an interior designer instead of actually living somewhere, except it wasn't sterile anymore. An entire corner of the massive living room had been transformed into a nursery, complete with a crib, changing table, rocking chair, and enough baby equipment to stock a small store. When did you... I started, staring at the setup. Yesterday, Alessio said, setting down the bag I'd packed at the hospital. Had it delivered and assembled while we were waiting for discharge. I walked over to the crib, running my hand along the smooth wood, and felt something crack in my chest, because he'd chosen the exact one I'd circled in a catalog months ago, before I'd looked at the price tag and realized it was 3 weeks in salary. How did you know which one? I asked quietly. I went to your apartment, Alessio admitted. Saw the catalogs on your coffee table. The things you'd circled versus what you'd actually bought told me everything about what you wanted versus what you could afford. The invasion of privacy should have made me angry, but instead, I just felt tired and oddly touched that he'd paid that much attention. Thank you, I said, meaning it. You don't need to thank me for taking care of my son, Alessio replied, but his voice was softer than usual. Or you. Matteo started crying then, the hungry cry I'd learned to recognize in 48 hours of motherhood, and I settled into the rocking chair to feed him, while Alessio disappeared into another room making phone calls I could hear through the walls. No, I don't care what the shipment costs. Tell Dimitri if he can't handle security on the east side, I'll find someone who can... What do you mean? Julian showed up at the warehouse. When? His voice got quieter after that, too low for me to make out words, and I focused on Matteo's tiny face as he ate, his eyes closed in blissful concentration. You're perfect, I whispered to him. Even if your father is making me insane, you're absolutely perfect. Your father hears that, Alessio said from the doorway, startling me, and agrees you're perfect, less certain about the insane part. I looked up to find him leaning against the frame, tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, looking more human and less crime lord than I'd seen him in days. Everything okay? I asked, nodding toward where he'd been on the phone. Nothing that can't wait, he said, moving into the room and sitting on the arm of the couch near my chair. How's he doing? Eating like he's training for a marathon, I said, adjusting Matteo's position. The lactation consultant said that's normal, but it's exhausting. What can I do? Alessio asked, and he sounded genuinely helpless in a way that would have been funny if I wasn't so tired. Learn to lactate, I suggested, and his startled laugh was worth the joke. Might be beyond even my capabilities, he said, his eyes on Matteo with that same wonder I'd seen in the hospital, though I'd try if it would help. The domesticity of the moment felt surreal. Sitting here feeding our son while Alessio watched like this was the most fascinating thing he'd ever witnessed. And I let myself pretend for just a minute that this was normal, that we were a normal couple with a normal baby in a normal situation. Then Alessio's phone buzzed and reality crashed back in. He read the message and his expression went dark, the softness disappearing behind the mask he wore when dealing with his world. "What?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "Julian sent another message," Alessio said, his voice flat. "Pictures of you leaving the hospital. Close-ups of Matteo in his car seat. He wants me to know he can get to you whenever he wants." Ice flooded my veins, and I pulled Matteo closer instinctively. "How did he get past your security?" "He didn't," Alessio said grimly. "He hired a photographer, probably someone who works for the hospital. Legal, untraceable, and a very clear threat." "So what do we do?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Alessio was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful. "I need to handle Julian, permanently, but that means leaving you here, and I don't—" "How long?" I interrupted. "A few hours, maybe less." He looked at me with something like desperation. "I have 12 men on this building, cameras on every entrance, and someone outside this door at all times. You'll be safe." "I know," I said, surprising myself by meaning it. "I trust you to keep us safe." Something shifted in his expression, gratitude and relief, and something deeper that made my breath catch. "I'll be back before dark," he promised, standing and moving to press a kiss to Matteo's head, then hesitating before leaning down to kiss my forehead with devastating gentleness. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me." He left with that same military efficiency he did everything, and I listened to him giving orders in the hallway before the elevator chimed, and silence filled the penthouse. I put Matteo down for a nap and wandered the space, taking in details I'd missed earlier. Alessio's bedroom was surprisingly lived in, books stacked on the nightstand and clothes actually visible in the walk-in closet. And on his dresser I found a photo that made my breath catch. Us, from that first night on the balcony, taken by someone at the gala without our knowledge. We were turned toward each other, laughing about something, and the way we looked at each other was so full of possibility it hurt to see. He'd kept it, through everything, through leaving me, and 9 months apart and all of it. He'd kept this photo where he'd see it every day. "God damn it, Alessio," I whispered, my eyes burning with tears I refused to shed. My phone rang, unknown number, and I almost didn't answer before curiosity won out. "Hello?" "Ilara Vasquez," a woman's voice said, smooth and poisonous. "We haven't been formally introduced. I'm Vanessa Cortez." My blood ran cold. "How did you get this number?" "I have access to a lot of things," she replied, "including information about you. The struggling waitress with dreams of culinary school, working doubles to save money she'll never have, raising a baby alone because she wasn't smart enough to lock down the father before getting pregnant." "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice steady through pure force of will. "I want you to understand something," Vanessa said. "Alessio Santoro doesn't do family. He doesn't do domestic bliss and babies and white picket fences. He does power and control and violence, and eventually he's going to realize that you and that baby are liabilities he can't afford." "Is there a point to this call?" I interrupted. "Or are you just bitter that he never wanted you?" Silence, sharp and dangerous. And I knew I'd hit a nerve. "You think you're special?" Vanessa asked, venom dripping from every word. "You think because you spread your legs and got knocked up that you matter to him? You're a complication he'll eliminate the moment you become more trouble than you're worth. Then why are you so threatened by me?" I challenged. "If I'm just a complication, why waste your time calling?" "Because I'm giving you a chance," she said. "Take your baby and leave the city. Disappear. I'll make sure you have money, enough to start over somewhere safe, and Alessio never has to know I helped you." "In exchange for what?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "In exchange for him being free to focus on what matters. The organization, his empire, the things that made him powerful in the first place." "No," I said simply. "No," Vanessa repeated, like she couldn't believe I'd refused. "You're choosing to stay in danger, to raise your son in a world where people like Julian exist, just because you're too stubborn to admit this won't work. I'm choosing," I said slowly, "to trust that Alessio is capable of being more than what you think he is, and I'm choosing to fight for my son's right to know his father. So no, Vanessa, I'm not running. And if you call this number again, I'm telling Alessio everything, and we both know how that conversation will go." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline, and immediately called Alessio. He answered on the first ring. "What's wrong?" "Vanessa just called me," I said. offered me money to leave the city with Matteo. Silence, the kind that preceded violence. And when Alessio spoke, his voice was lethal. What did you say? I told her no, I replied, and that if she contacted me again, I'd tell you everything. Where are you right now? He asked. Your bedroom, looking at a photo of us from 2 years ago that you apparently kept. His sharp exhale told me he hadn't expected me to find that. I'm coming back. 20 minutes. Alessio, you said you needed to handle. Nothing is more important than making sure you're okay, he interrupted. On I'm coming back, he hung up, and I stood there holding my phone and staring at that photo, and something shifted in my chest because he'd chosen me, was choosing me, over handling Julian or protecting his empire or any of it. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Matteo's cry pulled me from my thoughts, and I went to feed him again, settling into the rocking chair that was quickly becoming my favorite spot in the entire penthouse. True to his word, Alessio walked through the door 18 minutes later, and the look on his face when he found us in the nursery was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. You stayed, he said, like he'd half expected to find us gone despite my refusal of Vanessa's offer. I told you I would, I replied, adjusting Matteo against my shoulder to burp him. And I don't break my promises. Alessio moved closer, his hand gentle on Matteo's back, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I know I don't deserve this. Another chance. Your trust. Any of it. But I'm going to spend every day proving I can be the man you both need. You already are, I said quietly, meeting his eyes. You're here. That's more than a lot of fathers do. The bar is remarkably low, he said with a hint of his usual dry humor. Maybe, I agreed, but you're clearing it, and that counts for something. We stayed like that, the three of us in the nursery while the sun set over the city beyond the windows, and for the first time since Alessio had walked back into my life, I let myself believe that maybe, possibly, we could actually make this work. Not because it was easy or safe or anything resembling normal, but because we were choosing it, choosing each other, choosing to fight for what we were building, instead of running from what scared us. And outside, in the dangerous world we inhabited, Julian and Vanessa could plot all they wanted. We'd be ready. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. The attack came 3 days later, at 2 in the morning when Matteo was finally sleeping for more than 90 minutes straight, and I was so exhausted I barely registered the sound of breaking glass. But Alessio did. He was off the couch where he'd been sleeping, refusing to take the bed while I recovered, and had a gun in his hand before my brain even processed what the noise meant, and I watched him move through the darkened penthouse with lethal grace toward the source of the sound. Stay here, he commanded in a voice that left no room for argument. Lock the bedroom door and get in the bathroom with Matteo. Now. I didn't hesitate, just grabbed the bassinet and ran, my healing body protesting the movement but adrenaline overriding the pain, and I locked us in the master bathroom just as I heard voices in the living room, harsh and male and definitely not friendly. Matteo woke up and started crying, and I pressed him against my chest, trying to muffle the sound while my heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. Gunshots. 3 of them, loud enough that I felt them in my bones, and then silence that was somehow worse than the noise. Alessio, I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. More footsteps, closer now, and I looked around the bathroom desperately for anything I could use as a weapon, settling on a heavy glass perfume bottle that wouldn't do much but was better than nothing. The doorknob rattled. Ilara, it's me. Alessio's voice came through, rough and urgent. Open the door. I fumbled with the lock and yanked it open to find him standing there with blood on his shirt and a wild look in his eyes that made him look more dangerous than I'd ever seen him. Are you hurt? I asked, looking for wounds. Not my blood, he said shortly, moving past me to check the bathroom window. There were 2 of them, Julian's men. They're not a problem anymore. The casual way he said it, the absolute certainty that he'd killed 2 people to protect us, should have terrified me, but instead I just felt relieved that he was alive and we were safe. How did they get past your security? I asked, still holding Matteo against my chest. Someone on the inside helped them, Alessio said, his jaw tight with fury. Yeah, I'm handling it. He made a call, spoke in rapid Italian too fast for me to follow, and within 5 minutes the penthouse was full of his men cleaning up whatever had happened in the living room, while Alessio ushered us into the bedroom. We're leaving, he said, already pulling clothes from his closet. Pack whatever you need for Matteo. We're not staying here. Where are we going? I asked, obeying automatically because the adrenaline was wearing off and exhaustion was crashing over me in waves. Somewhere safer, he replied cryptically, and somewhere Julian doesn't know about. 20 minutes later, we were in another black SUV heading out of the city, Matteo asleep in his car seat, completely oblivious to the chaos, and I watched the lights blur past the window, wondering how my life had turned into an action movie. I need to tell you something, Alessio said into the silence, his hands tight on the steering wheel. About why I really left. I turned to look at him, surprised because he'd been so careful about what he shared, and I saw him struggling with whatever he was about to say. Julian didn't just want my position, he continued. He wanted you dead, specifically. He thought if he could take you from me, I'd be weak enough to challenge. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Vanessa fed him information about us, Alessio said, his voice hard. Told him you were my weakness, that eliminating you would break me. And she was right, it would have, so I made a choice. You left to protect me, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. I left because staying with you meant painting a target on your back, he corrected. Julian had already sent people after you once. I stopped them, but I knew he wouldn't give up. So I made it look like we were over, like you meant nothing to me, and I've spent the last 9 months making sure he believed it. But he knows now, I said, quietly. About Matteo. Yes, Alessio agreed grimly, which means the game has changed. I can't protect you by staying away anymore, so I'm protecting you by making sure Julian doesn't survive the week. The casual declaration of murder should have shocked me, but I'd crossed some line in the past few days where Alessio's violence in defense of us felt less like a crime and more like justice. Where are we going? I asked again. A house upstate, he said. My grandfather left it to me. No one knows about it except my most trusted people, and I've had it fortified for situations exactly like this. We drove for 2 hours, leaving the city behind for winding roads and dark forests, and when we finally pulled up to a house hidden behind tall gates and stone walls, I understood what he meant by fortified. Armed guards, security cameras, motion sensors. The whole place was a fortress disguised as a country estate. This is where you grew up? I asked, taking in the elegant stone structure. Summers, Alessio confirmed, carrying Matteo's car seat while I grabbed bags. My grandfather believed in having places no one could find you when necessary. The inside was surprisingly warm, less sterile than the penthouse, with worn furniture and family photos on the walls that showed a younger Alessio, with an old man who had kind eyes and the same sharp cheekbones. Make yourself comfortable, Alessio said, setting Matteo down gently. I need to make some calls. He disappeared into another room, and I explored with Matteo in my arms, finding a kitchen that looked recently stocked, and bedrooms that had been prepared for our arrival. Everything Alessio did was strategic, planned, controlled, and I was starting to understand that this was how he showed love, by protecting and providing and making sure every detail was handled. I was feeding Matteo in a rocking chair by the window when Alessio returned, and something in his expression made my stomach drop. What happened? I asked. I found the person who helped Julian's men get past security, he said, sitting heavily on the couch. It was Marcus, one of my oldest men. Julian paid him $2 million to give them access. What did you do? I asked, though I already knew. What I had to, Alessio replied, meeting my eyes. I can't have people in my organization who betray me, especially not when it puts you and Matteo at risk. I should have felt something about the implied execution, horror or disgust or fear, but all I felt was tired acceptance that this was Alessio's world, and I'd chosen to be part of it. I'm not going to apologize for protecting you, he added, seeming to read my silence as judgment. I'm not asking you to, I said quietly. But I'm just trying to understand how to be okay with it. You don't have to be okay with it, Alessio said, standing and moving closer. You just have to trust that I won't let anyone hurt you or our son. Everything else is my burden to carry. That's not how partnerships work, I replied, adjusting Matteo to burp him. You don't get to carry everything alone. We're partners now, he asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question. We're something, I said, not quite ready to define it. We're parents together. We're surviving together. We're building something that doesn't have a name yet. Alessio knelt beside the rocking chair, his hand gentle on Matteo's back, and when he looked up at me, his expression was more open than I'd ever seen it. I love you, he said simply. I loved you 2 years ago on that balcony. I loved you when I left even though it destroyed me, and I love you now even though I have no right to. That's not going to change regardless of what you decide about us. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest, and terrifying in its vulnerability, and I felt tears burn behind my eyes, because I'd wanted to hear those words for so long, and now that I had them, I didn't know what to do with them. And I love you too, I admitted, the words tasting like surrender and victory simultaneously. I hate that I do. I hate that you left and came back and upended everything, but I love you and I can't seem to stop. Then don't, Alessio said, his hand moving to cup my face. Don't stop. Let me prove I can be what you need. You already are, I said, echoing my words from days ago. You're here. You're trying. That's enough. He kissed me then, gentle and reverent like I was something precious, and I kissed him back with 9 months of missing him, and 3 days of falling for him all over again. Matteo made a noise of protest at being squished between us, and we broke apart laughing, the tension dissolving into something softer. We should sleep, Alessio said reluctantly. You're exhausted. So are you, I pointed out. I'll sleep when Julian is handled, he replied, standing and offering me his hand. For now, I'm just making sure you're both safe. I let him help me up and followed him to the master bedroom where a bassinet had already been set up beside a massive bed, and when I climbed under the covers with Matteo in arm's reach, Alessio settled into a chair by the window with his laptop and phone. You're not sleeping? I asked. I'm coordinating, he said, already typing. Julian made his move. Now it's my turn. I wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at me, and the last thing I saw before sleep claimed me was Alessio silhouetted against the window, a guardian keeping watch while we rested. When I woke hours later, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, Alessio was gone, but there was a note on the pillow beside me. Had to handle something. Back by noon. Guards are outside if you need anything. I love you. I picked up Matteo, who was starting to fuss, and went to find food, discovering that Alessio had stocked the kitchen with everything I might need, including my favorite coffee that I hadn't been able to afford in months. The attention to detail, the care in every small gesture, it all added up to a man who loved me in the only way he knew how, by controlling his environment to keep me safe and comfortable. It should have felt suffocating, but instead it just felt like being seen, being valued, being loved by someone who showed it through actions instead of just words. My phone rang, Alessio's name on the screen, and I answered immediately. Everything okay? I asked. Better than okay, he said, and I heard satisfaction in his voice. Julian won't be a problem anymore. What does that mean? I asked, though I knew. It means I'm coming home to you and Matteo, Alessio replied, and we're going to figure out how to build a life together without looking over our shoulders. I like the sound of that, I said, surprising myself by meaning it. Me too, Tesoro, he said softly. Me too. Chapter 7. Aftermath. Alessio returned 3 hours later looking exhausted and dangerous, blood on his knuckles that he tried to hide by shoving his hands in his pockets. And when I met him at the door with Matteo in my arms, his entire expression softened in a way that still surprised me. Is it done? I asked, because dancing around what he'd been doing felt dishonest. It's done, he confirmed, reaching out to touch Matteo's tiny hand. Julian won't be making any more moves against us or anyone else. I should have asked for details, should have demanded to know exactly what done meant, but the truth was, I didn't want to know the specifics, didn't want to carry that weight when Alessio was clearly willing to carry it for both of us. Good, I said simply, stepping back to let him inside. And are you hurt? Nothing that matters, he replied, which I was learning was Alessio speak for. Yes, but I'm not admitting it. Let me see, I insisted, using my free hand to grab his wrist and pull his hand from his pocket. His knuckles were split and already bruising, and there was a cut on his forearm that looked deeper than it should be, and I felt anger rise in my chest that he was so cavalier about his own well-being. Bathroom, I ordered. Now, Ilara. Now, Alessio, I repeated, using the tone I'd perfected serving difficult customers. Or, I'm calling your doctor myself. He followed with poorly concealed amusement, and I settled Matteo in his bassinet before dragging Alessio into the bathroom and making him sit on the edge of the tub while I found the first aid kit. You don't have to do this, he said, as I cleaned the cut on his arm with antiseptic that had to sting, even though he didn't flinch. Yes, I do, I replied, focusing on the task instead of how close we were, how I could smell his cologne mixed with gunpowder and something darker, because apparently you won't take care of yourself. I've had worse, he said, watching me work with an intensity that made my hands shake slightly. That's not the point, I said, applying butterfly bandages to hold the cut closed. The point is that you matter too. You're not just a weapon or a shield. You're a person. You're Matteo's father. I stopped, not ready to finish that sentence. But Alessio caught my wrist gently. I'm what? He prompted, his voice low. You're important to me, I admitted quietly. And I need you to stop treating yourself like you're disposable. Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability breaking through the careful control. No one's ever, he started, then stopped and tried again. My whole life, I've been valued for what I can do, what I can provide, how useful I am. No one's ever cared if I was okay. Well, I do, I said firmly, moving to clean his knuckles with the same careful attention. So get used to it. He pulled me closer with his uninjured hand, drawing me to stand between his legs. And when he looked up at me, his eyes were suspiciously bright. I don't deserve you, he said roughly. Probably not, I agreed, making him laugh despite the emotion thick in his throat. But you're stuck with me anyway. He kissed me then, slow and deep, and full of everything we weren't saying, and I let myself sink into it for a moment before Matteo's cry pulled us apart. Duty calls, I said, pulling back with reluctance. I'll get him, Alessio offered, standing and moving to the bassinet before I could protest. You've been handling everything while I was gone. I watched him lift Matteo with increasing confidence, the awkwardness from the hospital already fading as he learned how to support the tiny head and settle the weight against his chest. And something in my heart cracked wide open at the sight. You're getting good at that, I observed. I'm motivated, he replied, bouncing slightly in the instinctive way new parents do. And I read 4 books on infant care yesterday while you were sleeping. 4 books. I'm a fast reader, he said with a hint of his usual arrogance, and I don't like not knowing how to do things. Of course he didn't. Alessio Santoro, mob boss and new father, approaching parenting with the same intensity he brought to running a criminal empire. My phone rang, unknown number again, and I almost ignored it before Alessio nodded that I should answer while he handled Matteo. Hello? Ilara, Vanessa's voice came through, and I immediately put the call on speaker so Alessio could hear. I heard about Julian. Tragic accident, the news is saying. Fell from his balcony. Is there a reason you're calling? I asked flatly. I'm calling to congratulate you, she said, and I heard poison dripping from every word. You won. Alessio chose you and that baby over everything, and now Julian's dead, and the organization is in chaos. Sounds like a personal problem, I replied, watching Alessio's expression darken as he listened. It's about to be your problem too, Vanessa continued, because with Julian gone, there's a power vacuum, and not everyone is happy about Alessio's sudden focus on domestic bliss instead of business. Get to the point, Alessio said, speaking for the first time. The point, darling, Vanessa purred, is that the council is meeting tomorrow to discuss leadership, and there are some who think Alessio's priorities have shifted enough that perhaps someone else should take over. Let them try, Alessio said coldly. I built this organization from nothing after my grandfather died. No one takes it from me, even if holding on to it means putting your new family at risk, Vanessa challenged, because that's what's going to happen. Every move you make, every decision, your enemies will use them against you. That baby is leverage now, and so is she. Then I eliminate my enemies, Alessio said simply, one by one if necessary. You can't eliminate everyone, Vanessa replied, and eventually you'll have to choose. The crown or the family, power or love. You can't have both. Watch me, Alessio said, and hung up before she could respond. Silence filled the room, broken only by Matteo's soft breathing, and I saw Alessio wrestling with something, tension radiating from every line of his body. She's not wrong, I said quietly. You can't protect us and run an empire simultaneously. Something has to give. Nothing gives, Alessio said fiercely, turning to face me with Matteo still in his arms. I don't sacrifice either of you for power, and I don't give up what I built because people think I'm weak now. Then what's your plan? I asked, because she's right, that we're targets, as long as you're in charge. Alessio was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was measured and careful. I restructure, promote people I trust to handle day-to-day operations, step back from the frontline work, stay in control but from a distance that keeps you safe. Is that even possible? I asked skeptically. I'm making it possible, he replied with absolute conviction, because the alternative is unacceptable. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he could somehow balance the violence of his world with the softness we were building, but doubt crept in around the edges. And what if it's not enough? I asked. What if stepping back just makes you look weaker? Then I deal with whoever challenges me, Alessio said, and there was steel in his voice. But I do it without putting you in the crossfire. That's non-negotiable. He handed Matteo back to me and pulled out his phone, already making calls and issuing orders, and I listened to him systematically restructure his entire organization to create the distance he needed. It was ruthless and efficient, and absolutely terrifying in its completeness. By the time he finished, an hour later, he'd promoted 3 people, demoted 2, and made it clear to everyone in his organization that his family was off limits under penalty of death. That should buy us time, he said, sitting heavily on the couch. And I'm calling that council meeting myself, tomorrow. Here, let them come to me on my territory. Is that safe? I asked. One safer than going to them, he replied. And I want them to see you and Matteo. Want them to understand exactly what they're dealing with if they think about making moves. The idea of being paraded in front of a room full of criminals made my skin crawl. But I understood the strategy. Make his family real instead of abstract. Make us people instead of just leverage. Okay, I agreed, but I'm not dressing up. If they're coming here, they see us as we are. Alessio smiled, genuine and warm. I wouldn't want it any other way. That night, we fell into an exhausted routine, taking turns with Matteo's feedings and diaper changes, and somewhere around 3 a.m. when we were both awake changing sheets because our son had proven that diapers were merely suggestions, Alessio started laughing. What? I asked, too tired to see the humor. This, he said, gesturing at us in our pajamas covered in various baby fluids. Julian spent months trying to destroy me, and this little human accomplished it in 3 days without even trying. crying. Destroyed you? I repeated. Completely unmade me, Alessio confirmed, looking down at Matteo with such love it made my chest ache. And I've never been happier about being destroyed. I kissed him then, soft and brief and full of affection, and we finished changing the sheets together before collapsing back into bed with Matteo between us. Tomorrow's going to be intense, Alessio said into the darkness. Today is technically tomorrow, I pointed out, checking the clock. It's almost 4 a.m. Then in a few hours it's going to be intense, he corrected, and I felt him take my hand across Matteo's sleeping form. But we'll handle it. Together, I added. Together, he agreed. And lying there in the pre-dawn darkness with our son breathing softly between us, and a room full of dangerous men approaching in hours, I felt something close to peace. Because whatever came next, whatever challenges Vanessa or the council or the world threw at us, we'd face it as a family, broken and complicated and definitely not traditional, but ours. And that was enough. Chapter 8. The Crown and the Family. The council arrived at noon. 7 men in expensive suits who moved with the kind of confidence that came from decades of violence and power, and I watched from the upstairs window as they filed into Alessio's study like predators sizing up territory. You don't have to do this, Alessio said from behind me, Matteo asleep against his shoulder. I can handle them alone. No, I said, turning to face him with more confidence than I felt. We do this together. That's the whole point, isn't it? Showing them you're not weak. You're evolved. Something like pride flickered across his expression. Evolved. I like that. We walked downstairs together, Alessio carrying Matteo while I stayed close beside him, and when we entered the study, all 7 men went silent, their eyes tracking us with various degrees of curiosity and calculation. Gentlemen, Alessio said, his voice carrying the authority that made grown men obey. A thank you for coming. We didn't have much choice, one of them said. An older man with gray hair and cold eyes I recognized from photos as Vincent Calabresi. You made it an order, not an invitation, because what we're discussing isn't optional, Alessio replied, settling into his chair behind the massive desk while I took the seat beside him, Matteo still sleeping peacefully. The organization is restructuring, and you all need to understand what that means. It means you've gone soft, another man said, his Italian accent thick. Got yourself a family and forgot what it takes to run this business. Careful, Enzo, Alessio said quietly, and the threat in his voice was unmistakable. I killed Julian 3 days ago with my bare hands while my son slept upstairs. Does that sound soft to you? Enzo had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Vincent leaned forward with interest. So, the rumors are true. You eliminated Julian personally. He sent men after my family, Alessio said simply. What did you expect me to do? We expected you to handle it like you always have, Vincent replied, efficiently and without emotion. Instead, you disappeared for days, ignored business, let operations suffer because you were playing house. I was protecting what's mine, Alessio corrected, his hand moving to rest on my shoulder, and establishing new priorities, which brings us to why you're here. He outlined his restructuring plan with the same precision he brought to everything, delegating territories and responsibilities while making it clear he remained in ultimate control. And I watched the men's reactions carefully, seeing who accepted and who resisted. Most seemed willing to adapt, but Vincent and Enzo exchanged looks that made my skin prickle with warning. You're making yourself vulnerable, Vincent said, when Alessio finished. Stepping back from daily operations, focusing on your family, it sends a message that you're no longer committed. It sends a message that I'm smart enough to delegate, Alessio countered, and secure enough in my position that I don't need to micromanage everything. Or it sends a message that you're distracted, Enzo added, his eyes sliding to me and Matteo, and that you have weaknesses now that didn't exist before. The room went very still, and I felt Alessio's hand tighten on my shoulder. My family is not a weakness, he said, each word precise and deadly. They're a reason to be smarter, more strategic, more ruthless when necessary. Julian learned that lesson too late. I hope you're not making the same mistake. Before either man could respond, the door to the study opened, and Vanessa walked in like she owned the place, her heels clicking against the hardwood. Sorry I'm late, she said with a smile that was all venom. Traffic was terrible. You weren't invited, Alessio said coldly. No, but I have information the council needs to hear, Vanessa replied, pulling out her phone, about your girlfriend and her interesting past. Ice flooded my veins because I had no idea what she was talking about, what secrets she thought she'd uncovered, but I kept my face neutral and my voice steady when I spoke. This should be entertaining, I said, meeting her eyes. Please, Enlighten us. Vanessa's smile widened as she pulled up something on her phone. Alara Vasquez, formerly Alara Chen, changed her name 6 years ago after her father was convicted of embezzlement. $60 million stolen from the company he worked for, money that was never recovered. The room erupted in murmurs, and I felt all eyes turn to me with new suspicion. My father's crimes are not mine, I said clearly, refusing to show weakness. I changed my name to distance myself from his actions. I've never touched a cent of that money because I have no idea where it is. Convenient, Vincent said. And now you're with the head of the most powerful criminal organization in the city. Some might say that's quite a coincidence. Some might be idiots, Alessio said flatly. Alara worked as a waitress, barely making rent. If she had access to $60 million, I'm pretty sure she wouldn't be serving risotto to entitled pricks. Several of the men actually smiled at that, but Vincent wasn't backing down. Still, it raises questions about her motivations, he pressed. About whether she's using you the same way her father used his employer. I stood up, carefully taking Matteo from Alessio's arms, and walked around the desk to face Vincent directly. Let me make something very clear, I said, my voice hard. I didn't know who Alessio was when I met him. I didn't know about his organization or his power or any of it. I fell in love with a man on a balcony who made me laugh and treated me like I mattered. And when I got pregnant, I didn't come running to him for money or protection. I handled it alone because I didn't think he wanted us. I shifted Matteo in my arms, letting them all see him clearly. This baby exists because I loved his father enough to keep him even though I was terrified and broke and alone. Not because I wanted access to power or money, but because he's my son, and I would die before I let anyone use him as leverage. The room was silent, all of them watching me with varying degrees of surprise, and I turned to look at Alessio with everything I felt written on my face. I don't care about your empire or your money or any of it, I continued, speaking to him now instead of them. I care about you. The man who reads parenting books at 3 a.m. and gets blood on his knuckles protecting us, and looks at our son like he's witnessing a miracle. That's who I choose. Not the crown, not the power, just you. Alessio stood and crossed to me, cupping my face in his hands with devastating gentleness. I choose you too, he said quietly, over everything. Always. He kissed me then, in front of the entire council, claiming me publicly in a way that left no room for doubt about where his priorities lay. When we broke apart, he turned to face the room with my hand in his. Here's how this works, Alessio said, his voice carrying absolute authority. The restructuring happens as outlined. Anyone who has a problem with that can challenge me directly and see how that goes. Anyone who threatens my family in any way dies slowly. And Vanessa, he turned his full attention to her. You're out. Completely. I want you gone from the city by tomorrow. You can't exile me, Vanessa said, but I heard uncertainty creeping into her voice. I just did, Alessio replied, and if you're still here in 24 hours, I'll make sure you wish you'd left. Vincent stood, and for a moment I thought he was going to challenge Alessio, but instead he extended his hand. The restructuring is acceptable, he said, and anyone stupid enough to go after your family deserves what they get. One by one, the other men agreed. Even Enzo, who looked like he'd swallowed glass, but wasn't dumb enough to challenge Alessio when he just publicly killed Julian. The council filed out, leaving just us and Vanessa, who stood there looking absolutely furious. You think this is over, she spat. You think you can just have both, the empire and the happy family? I don't think, Alessio said calmly. I know, because I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect what's mine, and you're not willing to do anything except scheme and manipulate. This isn't finished, Vanessa said, heading for the door. Yes, it is, I said, making her stop. Because you lost. Not because we're stronger or smarter, but because we actually love each other, and you've never loved anything except power. So go, Vanessa, leave the city, start over somewhere else, and let us build our life without you poisoning it. She left without another word, and the door closing behind her felt like the end of a chapter. Alessio pulled me against him carefully, mindful of Matteo between us, and I felt him exhale like he'd been holding his breath for days. You were incredible, he said against my hair. Absolutely incredible. I meant every word, I replied. You're what matters, not the rest of it. What if I told you, he said slowly, that I'm thinking about stepping down completely, handing control to Vincent and retiring from the organization? I pulled back to look at him, searching his face for signs he was joking. Are you serious? I don't know, he admitted. Part of me thinks that's the only way to keep you truly safe. But another part worries that stepping down completely makes us vulnerable in different ways. Then don't, I said. Don't step down entirely. Keep control. Keep the structure you built, but do it the way you outlined. from a distance, smart instead of hands-on. "You're okay with that?" he asked. "With being connected to this world?" "I'm okay with being connected to you," I corrected. "The world comes with you, and I can handle it as long as we're together." Mateo chose that moment to wake up and start crying, breaking the serious mood, and we both laughed as Alessio took him and started the bouncing that had become second nature. "You want to know what I think?" I said, watching them together. "Always," Alessio replied. "I think we don't have to choose between the crown and the family," I said. "I think we build something new. A life where you can be both the man who runs an empire and the man who changes diapers at 2 a.m., where I can be both the woman who stands beside you at council meetings and the one who pursues culinary school when I'm ready." "Both," Alessio repeated, like he was testing the word. "I like that." "Me too," I said, moving to stand beside him, the three of us together. "We don't fit into traditional boxes anyway. Might as well create our own." He kissed me again, soft and full of promise, and Mateo made a noise of protest at being squished between us that made us both smile. "Come on," I said, taking his free hand. "Let's go upstairs and figure out what normal looks like for us." "Normal," Alessio said with a laugh. "Pretty sure we left normal behind the moment I walked into that restaurant." "Then we'll make a new definition," I replied. Together, and as we walked upstairs to our room, our son between us and the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, I felt something I hadn't felt in 9 months. Hope. Not naive hope that everything would be easy, or safe, or perfect, but real hope that we could build something worth fighting for, that love could exist alongside danger, that family could survive in the spaces between violence and power, that we could be both who we'd been and who we were becoming, together, always together. Epilogue. 6 months later, the kitchen in our new house smelled like garlic and wine and the rosemary bread I was experimenting with, and I could hear Alessio upstairs getting Mateo ready for bed, his voice carrying through the vents as he read a story about dragons. Culinary school had started 3 months ago, online classes that let me learn while still being present for Mateo, and yesterday I'd gotten an A on my practical exam for the pasta dish I'd been perfecting. Alessio had celebrated by buying me a stand mixer that cost more than my first car, and then watching me make bread at midnight like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. The organization still existed, still operated under Alessio's ultimate control, but true to his word, he delegated most of the day-to-day operations, and only got involved when absolutely necessary, which meant he was home most nights for dinner and every morning for breakfast, and Mateo's first word had been "I bomber papa," which had made Alessio cry in a way he'd deny if anyone asked. Vanessa had left the city, and we hadn't heard from her since. Vincent ran most operations and reported to Alessio weekly. The other families had accepted the new structure. We'd survived. More than survived. We'd thrived. "He's out," Alessio said, appearing in the kitchen doorway looking rumpled and domestic in jeans and a t-shirt. "Took 3 books and 2 songs, but he finally went down. My hero," I teased, and he crossed to me, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. "How's the bread?" he asked, pressing a kiss to my neck. "Perfect," I replied. "Want to try it?" "I want to try you," he murmured, and I laughed and swatted him with the dish towel. "Food first, then we'll see about dessert." We ate at the kitchen island, talking about everything and nothing, and when we finally made it to bed hours later, I curled against his chest and felt completely, utterly content. "Ilara," Alessio said into the darkness. Marry me." I lifted my head to look at him, searching his face in the dim light. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "I know it's only been 6 months since everything happened. I know we're still figuring things out, but I want you legally mine. Want Mateo to have married parents. Want the world to know you're not just my girlfriend, you're my wife. That's the least romantic proposal ever," I said, but I was smiling. "Ilara Vasquez," he tried again. "Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you?" "Better," I allowed. "And yes." "Yes," he repeated, like he'd expected me to say no. "Yes," I confirmed, kissing him. "I'll marry you, on one condition." "Anything." "Small wedding," I said. "Just us, Mateo, and people we actually care about. No council, no politics, just family." "Deal," Alessio said immediately, as though my definition of small and yours might differ. 20 people maximum, I negotiated. 30, 25, and that's final. "Done," he agreed, sealing it with a kiss that started sweet and turned into something that made us both forget about sleep for a while. Later, tangled in sheets in each other, I listened to Alessio's heartbeat and thought about how far we'd come, from strangers on a balcony to broken hearts, to desperate reunions to this messy, complicated, absolutely perfect life we'd built. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too, Tesoro," he replied, his arms tightening around me, always. And in the room down the hall, our son slept peacefully, protected and loved, and completely oblivious to how much his existence had changed everything. The crown and the family, power and love, danger and safety. We'd found a way to have both, and that was enough.
Now, fun facts from the story. The name Mateo was chosen by Alara even before Alessio returned. She knew it was Alessio's grandfather's name and chose it to honor the only good man in his family, even believing Alessio would never know. Alessio kept the photo from the counter for 9 months on his bedroom dresser, where he saw it every day. He never got over Alara. He just pretended he had to protect her. Carmelo's restaurant is where Alessio took Alara on their first date. He deliberately went back there during those 9 months as if expecting to find her. He never imagined she'd be working there pregnant. Alessio read 4 books on fatherhood in 24 hours. The moment he found out Mateo was his, he literally devoured everything about caring for babies because not knowing how to do something is unacceptable to him. Vanessa never had Alessio. She always wanted him, worked for the organization, hoping he'd notice her romantically, but he never showed interest. That's why her hatred for Alara is so visceral. Alara started online culinary school. 3 months after Mateo's birth, Alessio enrolled her and paid for it as a gift. She protested, but he said, "You gave me a son. I'll give you your dream." Mateo's first word was Papa. At 6 months old, Alessio cried, denied that he cried. Alara has video proof that he cried. The stand mixer Alessio bought cost $800. Alara almost had a panic attack when she saw the price. Alessio said, "You got an A on the practical exam. You deserve the best equipment." She still thinks it's excessive, but uses it every day. Vincent Calabrese respected Alessio even more after the restructuring because he saw Alessio kill Julian, restructure the organization, and take care of a newborn at the same time. That's next-level competence. The proposal happened 6 months later, exactly when Mateo started sleeping through the night. Alessio deliberately waited until life had some normalcy before adding wedding planning to the chaos. "Now, darling, sit down. I need to talk about this story. I wrote The Heir He Never Knew because I was exhausted by Mafia dark romances where the guy is toxic and possessive and it's romanticized without consequences. The heroine gets pregnant and goes, oof, I'll hide it forever when he finds out. There's zero growth, just more possessiveness. The enemies are caricatures with no real motivation. The happy ending happens without anyone changing or doing therapy, metaphorical or literal nitrogen monoxide. I wanted a story where the separation has a real reason. Alessio didn't leave because he's an asshole. He left because people literally orchestrated situations to make it seem like loving her was fatal. Vanessa and Julian manipulated things for months. That doesn't excuse him making the decision alone, but it explains his immaturity at the time and the context. The lonely pregnancy has weight. Alara tried to tell him. She went to his house. He had disappeared. She spent 9 months alone, not because she wanted to hide it, but because there was literally no way to reach him. And when she could, after he returned, she chose not to look for him because he'd already made it clear he didn't want her. The reunion is dramatic, but realistic. My baby is being born now in the restaurant parking lot. Iconic. But also, she was working at 37 weeks pregnant because she needed money. That's real for a lot of people. He claims fatherhood immediately. Alessio doesn't go, is it mine? He does basic math and says he's my son with absolute conviction. Then he acts accordingly, calling doctors, clearing routes, staying for the birth. But he is not easily forgiven. Alara makes it very clear that he ruined everything. She doesn't run back. She sets boundaries. She says, "You destroyed me, and I don't know if I can trust you." That is emotional realism. The villain has motivation. Vanessa isn't evil just because. She wanted Alessio, worked for years hoping to be noticed, saw him fall in love with a common waitress, and hated it. That's villainy with depth. The villain has strategy. Julian doesn't attack randomly. He conspires, uses Vanessa, creates vulnerabilities, waits for the right moment. And still, Alessio destroys him because he underestimated how fiercely a father protects his child. There are real consequences. Alessio kills people. Julian, the intruders, Marcus, the traitor. Alara has to process being with the killer. They have to move, hide, restructure, everything. It's not love conquers all, Isley. It's love is worth the hard fight. The protagonist has agency. Alara isn't passive. She refuses Vanessa's bribe, confronts the council days after giving birth, sets boundaries with Alessio, pursues culinary school, actively decides to stay. She doesn't just accept. Fatherhood is taken seriously. Alessio isn't a sometimes dad. He reads 4 baby books, learns to change diapers, wakes up at night, restructures the entire organization to be present, cries when his son's first word is spoken. The ending is earned 6 months later. Marriage, culinary school, domestic life. Not because it was easy, but because both of them worked. Alessio delegated power, Alara accepted his world, and they built something new together. In summary, this story is about a powerful man learning that family is not weakness, a strong woman proving she doesn't need to be saved. She needs a partner, a baby who changes everything without trying, enemies who are smart, but not smart enough, love that survives conspiracy, violence, and 9 months of pain. A happy ending earned with blood, sweat, and hard work. Is it romantic? Also, yes. Is it emotionally realistic? Absolutely. And I loved every second of writing it. I hope you loved reading it as much as I loved creating it. That's it. Now it's over. Alessio and Alara are going to bake bread at midnight. Matteo will wake up at 3 a.m. and Vincent will send a weekly report that Alessio will read while changing a diaper. That's their life. Chaotic, dangerous, imperfect, but theirs. And that's enough. The next story is coming. See you next time, darling.